Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the SumoSprings Rear Helper Springs on a 2020 Winnebago Vista. Now this is what your SumoSpring is going to look like when it's installed on your chassis, and it does have to be drilled into the frame for your top mounting plate, but the bottom bracket just simply bolts around your leaf springs, and this is going to create a cushion between the frame of the vehicle and the leaf springs and just help absorb a lot of the shock that your factory suspension just doesn't handle very well. The big thing with RVs like this, as you drive them side to side, you're going to notice a lot of sway, and on the freeway you may get wind kind of blowing you back and forth, and this is going to help stabilize that because it creates a larger, it fills this gap essentially, whereas your factory jounce, it's pretty small and it takes a lot for it to finally compress enough for it to bottom out before you feel anything, and that's the difference. Is the SumoSpring is going to fill that void and be comfortable throughout. It's also progressive, which is really nice because as you put more weight or more sway on it, it's going to compress and fight against that. Now this is going to work in a pair, so it comes with each side, and it's going to be great because as you sway one side, that one side is going to compress and fight to push it back, as the other one is also going to kind of stretch and pull that back, so it's going to stabilize your vehicle. Now this has a 7,000 pound capacity, and it's not going to give you 7,000 pounds of more weight carrying capacity. It's what it can handle, and this should work out perfect for an F53 chassis like this. Now it does feel like a foam-like kind of makeup, which does make for really nice absorption, but this is microcellular construction, which also holds up to temperature, any chemicals, anything basically that the road may throw at this, it's going to be able to hold up to it. And as far as temperature goes, this goes from negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit up to 200, so you're not going to ever get to a point where these are going to be too hot or too cold to work. And that's the great part too, is once they're installed, there's zero maintenance required, and every time you turn or have your RV sway a little bit, you're going to feel these working, and it's just going to make for a better, more confident driving experience every time you're in your vehicle. Now speaking of that, we had this out on our test course with these installed, and it definitely makes a huge difference, so let's take a look at that. Now driving an RV, for a lot of people, you know, they're pretty comfortable. They have quite a bit of miles on a vehicle, but no matter who you are, even if you're experienced, when you have sway back and forth, it is kind of concerning feeling, especially when you get a little bit of cross breeze on a highway, you pass a semi, something along those lines, and you kind of get that swaying motion. But also when you go to turn in small areas like this parking lot that we have here, as I kind of turn, normally you do get a top heavy feel. Not that it feels like it's going to tip over, but it's not very concerning. Everything's leaning, and what we have with our front and rear Sumos installed on this is a little bit more precision. You get a little bit more feedback in the steering wheel, and most of it is just, it's more settled. It doesn't feel like it's top heavy swaying side to side. So as I make turns, just small increments, you can definitely notice it's ready to be ready for that turn. It doesn't have to get that weight to catch back up. Those SumoSprings will initiate a lot quicker, and that's going to bring it back to a center, giving it more of a planted feel. So it almost gives it a more car-like drive than a tall SUV or a tall RV as we have. So that's something that's really hard to quantify just with me talking about it. But if you take a look at some of the reviews of other people that have put these on their RV, you'll see it is a huge difference. And that's why I'm a big proponent of suspension upgrades, because every time you drive it, you're going to notice it. Every turn you make, you're going to be a little bit happier just overall with how it handles, how it feels, and you're just going to get a little less white knuckling as you're driving, so you can kind of relax at the wheel a little more and kind of enjoy the drive without having to kind of fight that sway back and forth. To begin, we are going to be taking off our wheels. Now this can technically be done with the wheels in place. It is pretty tricky. You're going to be drilling holes through the frame, so it's a lot easier if you have the ability to pull your wheels off to get this accomplished. So the way we did that, we put some pads underneath our jacks. We raised this up enough to get our tire up. Just make sure that you have your front chalked and that it's not going to move. The flange, it does have a gap compared to the others, and they're also a little bit smaller than the others, and these are the two that kind of hold on this cap here. To get these off, they do twist off. They're tricky because it's hard to get a socket in here without rubbing against the center of the cap. So what I ended up doing was with an 1 5/8 wrench, just kind of put this on here and then use You can use a breaker bar or a pry bar or something along those lines to kind of get this to loosen up. Once you kind of get it loose, they're not terribly tight. They're just kind of hard to get to. But once you kind of knock it loose, it should be able to come off fairly easily. And then there's going to be one exactly across from it, so get those two off, and that's going to allow us to start getting this taken off. So with those caps taken off, we can pull off this whole center section, and that's going to give us access to our lug nuts. We have these foam pads that go on some of the studs, just in a square shape. That just kind of keeps it from rubbing against here. So pull these off for now. We'll put them back on when we get our wheel on. But as far as our lug nuts, you're going to probably want a nice impact to knock these loose, or a solid breaker bar. Sometimes they can be pretty tough. Now I'm going to be using a fairly large impact here. These are a 33 millimeter socket is what I found that works best on these. So I'll go ahead and get these all knocked loose. So now we need to get our SumoSpring assembly put together, and this is going to allow us to put this on the leaf pack and use it as a template to where we're going to drill. And we're going to start by taking our bracket, and you'll see that there's 4 holes. You're going to use the longer elongated threads that are in the SumoSpring. Make sure you have this lip facing up. The bracket should go down just as we have it here. And then we have serrated flange nut hex bolts. So we'll just go ahead, we're going to get these hand tightened in, and then I'm going to tighten them down with a 9/16 socket. And when you tighten these down, they should pretty much bottom out, and you'll know that you'll have them tight enough. So you don't need to get too crazy here. Just go until it's snug like that. So with our top bracket in place, we're going to also put our lower bracket in, and there's these 2 forks here that kind of go on the outside of the leaf spring. That's going to go towards the front of the vehicle, and these are going to be the same on both sides. So just make sure that you do have this in the proper orientation. Try to square it up as best as possible. We're going to use that same hardware on the bottom here to get that tightened down. Just do a quick double check before I get it real tight. Make sure that it is squared up. Pretty well parallel with the top bracket. So take your assembly, and I'm going to just kind of get this in place to show you where it goes, and we'll make some marks. So this front forks go over our leaf springs here. Now this is where that wiring's kind of in the way, so we're going to need to move this. It is kind of bundled up here because we need our plates to sit against here. What we're looking for too when we get this in place, there is this tab. This is going to lock on the back side of our U-bolt, so that's kind of the position that we're looking for. So we're basically looking to see where we're going to be mounting this up. So let me clear out this wire. I'll get this in place against the frame. So I'm going to take a bundle of wires, cut the zip ties off, and then there's a slot right on this front side here. And I'm going to take my zip tie, feed it through, and that way we can rebundle it up a little bit higher to give us that clearance to be able to get our bracket in. Now it may get a little bit cumbersome here with the wires, so kind of take the top plate and push those up out of the way as we kind of slide this in to get it, make contact with the frame. And then again, I talked about that tab. Just get that kind of locked on your U-bolt, scoot this forward. And this is basically to give us an idea of where it's going to sit, which is right about this area. So I'm going to be using a chalk marker to just kind of make some lines. So just on the outside of our bracket here, I'll just make a nice line here, as well as here. And then I know that my holes are going to be about 1/2 inch in. So we need to make a measurement in the from the top of the frame down, and that's going to determine where we are going to be drilling through. So with your tape measure, you can use this outside line here to mark down at 4.5 inches. And you might want to go, when you mark it out a little bit wider so you can see it, because we'll be putting that assembly back in, and we'll be raising the axle to get it at that point. So mark 4.5 inches on both sides. So now you can put your assembly back in place. And what we're going to do is put a floor jack underneath the axle and raise this up until our bottom holes are aligned with this. Now, naturally it's going to want to kind of sit at an angle, but it does have enough squish in the Sumo to kind of level it out. So that's kind of what I look for, is make sure that this top portion of your bracket is level with the frame. So I'll go ahead and get my floor jack raised up. So after we've lifted our axle up, I'm going to again just make sure that this is nice and squared up. And at this point, having this parallel with the frame puts us at a good spot here to make our marks. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll mark out the bottom and the top, and then do that on the other side as well. So at this point, we do need to drill this out through the frame, and I recommend starting with a smaller bit than what we'll step it up to, which is going to be eventually a 3/8 bit, which is going to be large enough for our hardware to pass through. Take your time here. Drilling through this is a little bit tiring, but get some good sharp drill bits and a good drill. Also double check, reach back here, make sure that there's nothing in the way. Like right here, I do have a clip here holding on a wire, so I'm going to undo that. And just make sure that we're not making contact with anything as we drill through. So make sure you have your safety glasses on, and go ahead, get all your pilot holes drilled out, and then come back with that 3/8. Now this assembly is tricky to get back in place just because of that wiring, which unfortunately I don't really have an awesome solution, as some of this is pretty tight and can't really get it out of the way. But having it sit on top of our SumoSpring bracket should be just fine. So what we'll do, make sure your bottom plate, again, you have it kind of slid back so it's kind of aligned, and then take these, there's going to be 4 of these bolts. We're going to slide these through the holes that we drilled. And I suggest getting one started on each side so it kind of evens it out for you. So with our bolts passed through, go ahead and you're going to take these bronze colored flange nuts, and we're going to just thread these on by hand for now to get them all in place. And these are a 9/16, so we will be tightening these. You're going to want a 9/16 wrench and socket to accomplish that, so they're not spinning around. So we'll go through, get these all snugged down with our 9/16. Now we are going to be coming back with a torque wrench, so you don't have to get too crazy here. We just want to snug them up to where we get some of those threads taken back. And I always try to tighten on the nut side, so try to get your socket on there first and your wrench on the outside here. Now with those snugged down, we're going to come back with our torque wrench, and the torque setting is going to be found in the instruction manual. So adjust your torque wrench to that setting, and again, you're going to probably need a wrench to hold it to make sure it doesn't spin. If you need a torque wrench, we have these available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. This is going to make sure though that it's going to be tight enough for the lifespan of these bolts, not come loose, but also not too tight, putting any stress on the threads. So with those torqued down, we'll go ahead and make sure that our bracket's pulled all the way against with that arm holding on to our U-bolt here. Now we're going to take our carriage bolts, and there's these square holes on both sides of the bracket. So drop those down. And then we'll take our bottom bracket, we'll slide this up over our carriage bolts. And then we'll take our flange nuts here, get those started. So now we're going to tighten these down again with a 9/16 socket, and we're going to want to kind of alternate back and forth. So I pull down on the bracket so a carriage bolt doesn't pop up and spin on us. And we're just going to snug one up and then kind of work on the other side and go back and forth until we have this tightened down. So at this point, our SumoSpring is officially installed. All that's left to do is to get our wheel in place, lower down our jack, and just make sure everything's back to normal. And then we're going to just repeat the same process on the other side. So overall, not too bad as far as the installation. The drilling does get tricky, but I think the benefits totally outweigh the little bit of effort that goes into getting these installed. And that was a look and installation of the SumoSprings Rear Helper Springs on a 2020 Winnebago Vista.